evening, ladies and gentlemen. How is everybody doing today? I hope this video finds you well, healthy, and in good spirits, guys. I hope you were able to enjoy your weekend. I hope you were able to find some fun things to do that were not school related so that you were able to kind of wind down, relax, take your mind off of school for a little bit so that you come back to this week ready to work and ready to go. If you would like to share with me some of the things you did over the weekend or anything that you did that was fun and or exciting over the weekend, please feel free to do that using the links provided. Make sure you match the class period you're in with the class period on this slide, guys, so that I can hear from you and you get to talk to me and tell me all about your weekend. I'd love to hear about your weekend, love to hear what you did over the weekend, any fun or exciting things that you were able to do. Please feel free to share them with me. My weekend was pretty uneventful. I played a lot of video games, sat around. The weather wasn't great, so I didn't get to go outside or do anything like that. But it was at least a relaxing weekend, which is kind of what I was going for. So, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to go ahead and share with me how your weekend went. I'd love to hear from you. So, the plan for today. Today we are going to be reviewing the Fugitive Slave Law and the Dred Scott case. We're going to talk about the Google form and take a look at that. I'll give you a little bit of additional information if I feel like it's going to help the understanding and your guys' understanding of the Fugitive Slave Law and the Dred Scott case. That's what we're going to be focusing on, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just a couple reminders. Please make sure you have completed the workbook packet from Friday. Please make sure you have done the check for learning from Friday. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me during my office hours. Now, because I forgot to go over that, my office hours today, as usual, are from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. and from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. So if you do have any questions, you do feel a need to reach out to me, please do that, and I will answer those questions as quickly as you can and get back to you and respond to your email as quickly as I can. So that takes care of that. So those are just some of the reminders I wanted to make sure I went over with you guys. Let's go ahead and dig into that check for learning that we had on Friday. Wait a minute. I did just realize I've been making a small mistake. The check for learning we're going to be going over is the one from Wednesday, not Friday. It is the 27th. Friday's check for learning we're going to be going over on Wednesday. So the check for learning we're going over today is actually from Wednesday, not Friday. It was the Fugitive Slave Law and the Dred Scott case lesson. Okay, now that I've clarified that, let's pull up the check for learning from Wednesday, from the 27th. So, before I get into this, ladies and gentlemen, and before I talk about this, there is something that I want to make sure that I mention and want to make sure that I clarify. On some of the feedback that I gave you guys about this check for learning, I did have some comments about proper phrases that you can use, and I want to go ahead and explain that and take a minute to explain that. So as we can see on this poster, it says, "Caution colored people." So I want to clarify and I want to make sure that I mention that unless you are directly quoting this poster, or unless, and that is actually the only way it is acceptable, if you are directly quoting this poster, then using the phrase colored people is an acceptable phrase because you are quoting the poster. If you are trying to put the poster in your own words, I want to be clear that it is not acceptable to use the phrase colored people. Here is why. This was a phrase that was used in the 1860s. It was used even into the 1870s, 1880s, and into the 1900s as well, up to the 1910s, 1920s. It was used to talk about people that were not white, and it was used to talk about people that were not white in a way that expressed the view that non-white people were inferior to whites, which is why this is not an acceptable phrase to use today. Colored people is not an acceptable phrase to use today. There are other phrases you can use. You may use African American. If you're talking about slaves or runaway slaves, you can use runaway slaves, slaves, freed slaves. You can also use the phrase people of color. Now, I understand that that sounds very similar to colored people, but here is the difference. People of color is a phrase that is used today that is meant to mean anyone that is not white, and it is meant to be kind of a more empowering term. It is not used to mean anyone that is inferior to white. It is simply meant as a phrase to mean anyone that is not white. That is the difference between people of color, the way people of color is used, and the way colored people is used. I know that sounds complicated, guys. And as you get older, as you are kind of exposed to more historical documents and documents that use different phrases and different words, you will gain a better understanding of what phrases are acceptable and what phrases are no longer acceptable or outdated. I wanted to go ahead and take a second to explain why some of you saw those comments and some of you might not have if you were directly quoting or very closely paraphrasing, putting the poster in your own words and use that. I might have let it slide, but when writing about it and talking about it, make sure you do not use the phrase colored people unless you are directly quoting the poster. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I covered that, make sure I clarified that. So the poster says, caution, colored people of Boston, one and all. You are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with the watchmen and police officers of Boston. For since the recent order of the mayor and aldermen, they are empowered to act as kidnappers and slave catchers, and they have already been actually employed in kidnapping, catching, and keeping slaves. Therefore, if you value your liberty and the welfare of the fugitives among you, shun them in every possible manner, as so many hounds on the track of the most unfortunate of your race. Keep a sharp lookout for kidnappers and have top eye open. So the one thing we can tell is that it is talking to African Americans or people of color in Boston. So we know that automatically, we know right off the bat that this is a northern city. This is talking about runaway slaves and freed slaves that are living in the north, that are living in the city of Boston. And what it is trying to do is it is trying to warn runaway slaves not to go to the police and not to talk to the police or any watchman, any person that is associated with trying to keep law and order and stuff like that. Because if you do, they now are empowered as slave catchers. They can catch any runaway slaves, put them on trial, and then return them to their masters in the South. So it is trying to warn any runaway slaves to avoid the police so that they don't get caught and returned to the South as slaves. A slave owner would not want to do this and would not want to put this out there because they would want their slaves returned. An abolitionist would absolutely put this poster out because they would want to warn runaway slaves so that those runaway slaves would not be caught and brought back to slavery. They would want to see an end to slavery. That is why when I asked you, go in the wrong direction, would this be a poster that was written by a Northern abolitionist or a Southern slave owner? It would be written by a Northern abolitionist because they are trying to warn runaway slaves to avoid policemen so they don't get caught and aren't forced to be taken back to the South. So that is the correct answer. That is the answer I was looking for, or something close to that. So let me provide you with a few examples of correct answers and of answers that I was looking for. So the first answer comes from Nick Gilbert. And he says, I think this sign is made by a Northern abolitionist because it is warning the slaves about the cops kidnapping people of color in free states. Exactly. It's trying to warn slaves and runaway slaves about police officers kidnapping runaway slaves and other people of color and trying to bring them back to the South. Exactly. Very good. The next answer I have comes from Xavier Tedonio. Northern abolitionists, because they are telling people of color to watch out for slave catchers. Exactly. Excuse me. Sorry about that, guys. Exactly. There is no way a slave owner would ever warn runaway slaves that they were trying to force them back to the South. There is not a chance. They would try to keep that as quiet as possible. So that's why that second answer is correct. Third answer comes from Kat Mayer, and she says Northern because they are warning the people of color that there are people kidnapping them. Exactly. Very good. The fourth answer comes from Leah Morgan. This was written by a Northern abolitionist. I know this because they are warning the African Americans. A slave owner would not do that. Exactly. Very good. And then last but not least, the last answer comes from Nate Page. Northern abolitionists because they're talking about the Southern slave catchers who are trying to kidnap the people of color and keeping them as their slaves or returning them to the South to their former masters. Exactly. Very good. I want to say a great job to you five for understanding the poster and getting that correct. And for all of everybody else who got that answer correct. Very good. Great job, guys. That's what we were looking for. That's what I was looking for here. All right. So, just as kind of an idea, that fugitive slave law made it much easier for slave catchers and for slave owners to return runaway slaves to the South. Dred Scott was one of those examples, and he ended up being forced to stay in slavery, even though he was brought to a northern state where slavery was not legal. However, the Supreme Court ruling decided that he was a slave and that he would have to stay as a slave, and it attempted to solve the slavery issue, but it actually made it more complicated and made it more difficult. So that's just a little bit of a review about the Fugitive Slave Law and the Dred Scott case. And that poster, as long as you know about the Fugitive Slave Law, you will have no problem understanding that poster. So that wraps up today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have yourselves a fantastic day. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. And I will get back to you guys as quickly as I can. With that said, I hope you have a splendiferous day, and I will catch you guys tomorrow for tomorrow's lesson. Have a great day, guys.